I don't think that the AI is going to take our platform jobs away from us, but certainly we should be looking at how it can help make those jobs faster, more efficient, more cost effective for our businesses. Because if we can actually reduce the cost of infrastructure because we're automating more of it, we're making it more efficient to automate, we're discovering errors in our automation processes that would potentially generate massive bills for us. These are all things that are pretty fantastic, and I do think that that this is a tool that we should be considering, especially as we think about how does our infrastructure platform change, or does it change if we're starting to accelerate the delivery of these resources with the large language model chat based interaction. Hi, folks. So for today's episode of Cumulus on Cloud, we're going to discuss, wait for it. Yeah, you're right. No, we're going to discuss cloud. But actually, today we're really going to focus in on this whole idea that ChatGPT, the large language model approach to interacting with our systems in general, is going to really change what it means to run a platform, run a cloud environment, and basically continue to build a business in the systems that we have today. Well, I'm here to tell you that, at least in my opinion, it's not really going to change the world. It's going to maybe accelerate our ability to deliver on the goals and promises of platform. And to me, this is really the key. If you look at the interactions that you get with a chatbot style interface, so the OpenAI chat interface, ChatGPT, is the currently sort of the premier version of this kind of a solution. Microsoft is integrated into their Bing search engine, so you can ask Bing, and it will try to give you answers that are ChatGPT derived, or at least the GPT-4 model derived answers to questions. And this is great, but you'll notice that in many cases, the responses aren't quite what you expect. So now people start talking about prompt engineering in order to get this tool to give you the information that you need. Well, this is just this is just a nonsense approach. I have seen plenty of cases, and even I have tried and have used, I think successfully, the chat style interface to help me with a programming task, trying to figure out how to automate an environment. I've just recently gone from an AWS space where I have reasonable experience with Terraform, for example, to deploy AWS, and moved into an Oracle environment. Now you would think, oh well, I know Terraform. One version versus another is very simple. Well, there are enough differences in any of these platforms that you effectively have to learn the new specific functions, the new calls, heck, even the new descriptions. Right? We talk about an instance in Amazon and in a VM or an EC2 instance size. In Oracle, it's called a shape. Well, no difference. Who cares? But it means that I now have to model things instead of as instances. I have to create shapes. I have to change my code to support this. And the area where something like the chat style interface really comes in handy is if you can give it an example. Say, hey, I have a model for deploying a virtual machine or a container, and this is what that model looks like. This is what the code looks like. I'd like to see this now in a different style. Show me how that would look in Google. Show me how that would look in Oracle. There still is more configuration, baseline infrastructure that you need to put in place. And even starting from raw scratch, I find that the chat style interfaces can give you a good starting point. They can even give you maybe some idea of how the pieces are supposed to fit together. But really, I think that's the real value of these chat style services. It's not in accomplishing the overall task and handling it. And there are all kinds of interesting approaches to that as well. But it's really more in helping you put a structural footing in place, a basic model for how things can fit together. Unless you ask for it very specifically, a response to a coding question will give you often just a description of how you would code something. You can go a little bit deeper and say, can you actually show me the code? And often, in the AI style response, it will say, hey, as an AI, I can't tell you this, but how about this? And it will give you an example. Those examples almost 100% of the time do not compile properly, or they do not deliver the actual result that you need properly. But they give you enough of a framework that you can build off of it and actually implement the rest of the situation. And this is the benefit, right? I can build the modular space, the concept space of how something works. and then I can actually learn. Effectively, I can accelerate the learning of a language, right? And here, the Terraform based language is something that you should understand. You can ask, and you will get a response, but you won't necessarily get the full functional scenario. And often, when things are broken, you still have to have enough of an understanding of the language to understand how things are broken. The chat style interface also sort of has a history issue in that I've managed to get the system into effectively a loop. If you sort of take long enough to redescribe your problem, it starts regurgitating the original responses to your original query because you've effectively looped out of its summary space, its history of what it is that you're talking about. And in programming, that can be very difficult. Now, the chat style interface is not the only way that we can think about approaching our platform problems. Our how do I manage my infrastructure code? How do I deal with security? There is, of course, tools like AWS has their not AWS, sorry, ChatGPT and Microsoft through VS Code and GitHub have Copilot, which is their code-driven interface to help support your language definitions. The funny thing about that interface is that if you start creating incorrect code, it will start replicating the incorrect code for you. So you have to make sure that you're actually getting good code. And often, if you give it a variable name or something else, it's discovering a local context and it's using that local context to try to answer your questions, which is fantastic if your base code is viable and functional. But if it's, again, building from examples, like especially local examples that are not quite right, it has real trouble correcting that because it's kind of saying, I'm going to feed you what you have versus feeding you the generic response and generic answer. So it can be incredibly useful, but to me, I haven't yet seen all of these pieces truly come together to provide a I don't need to know anything answer to coding. So, the big question is, hey, is this going to take over our jobs? No, but I think also the inverse is if you're not leveraging these tools to help accelerate your understanding of a new language, accelerate your understanding of an old language, which you have sort of a set of known patterns for using, I think that's a mistake. One of our colleagues that we've been working with that has a bunch of experience in a bunch of different languages said that the way he tends to leverage these tools is if he's thinking of a function or a capability, he asks the system first, can you give me an example? Because he might learn something new in terms of features, capabilities, or code changes that have occurred since the original learning may have occurred maybe 10, 15, even 20 years ago, in terms of how to structure that kind of a conversation. I used the chat style interface very effectively for extending an asynchronous function in Python recently, something which I really just haven't integrated with. I haven't interacted with very much. And that style of here's a base function that I know is doing basically what I want, but it's not quite delivering the interactions that I'm looking for, it actually really can help because again it gives you the structure, it gives you the conceptual underpinnings and connections that maybe are a little hard to establish without having seen a set of examples. And really that's what you're getting out of the system is an example that you can then morph to your actual needs. I find it to be quite a useful tool, rather than something that's likely to take over the world. And if we apply this to the bigger topic at hand here, right? The to me, it's all about this AI large language model sort of system space. Um, I think that there's a lot of interest in understanding how these tools can make it easier for developers to get their job done. I come from the world of thinking about platforms and systems as the way of interacting with our compute infrastructure. And, the developers really just want to focus on building code that works, right, and getting it out into the world in a way that is functional and scalable. And if they can focus on how do I build the right functions, the right database interactions, the right data models for how to manage and manipulate my code, potentially accelerated and supported by the ChatGPT function, then we in the platform and infrastructure space can do the same thing. We can be more efficient about how we go about building a new technology into our platform. We can make it easier for our end users to consume that platform model by automating the deployment of services. And it's kind of amazing how much of the current codex, which is the language model that's really in the coding space, how much of that codex language knowledge is accurate. At the same time, there are deprecations that haven't been addressed because the codex model, the code model, is effectively stuck in 2021, which is 2 years ago. And 2 years is a long time in the coding system space. So we have to be aware of the fact that even though it can get us there, it can get us up and running, we're multiple versions of languages forward ahead of where the codex brain power is. And really, we haven't yet seen a great sort of feedback model beyond something like the VS Code plus GitHub Copilot kind of integration, where it tries to use your local code to help sort of bridge that gap. The only problem is if your local code is learning code, is trying to understand how to make something work code, which is what a lot of people I think are trying to leverage the Copilot and GPT space for. If you don't already have effectively your own micro codex of known good working code, then it's very hard for ChatGPT and the Copilot type interfaces to help accelerate your work there. So it's just something to really be aware of. So from a platform space, again, I think the real benefit to these large language models, and specifically the code centric large language models, is in helping to accelerate the language translation, right? Idea to at least architectural code model. There are still things though that the language models just don't seem to provide. And again, this might be down to this idea of prompt tuning. How do I ask the question is also how I'm going to get an answer. Terraform, I think, is a great example for this. If you ask the system, ask ChatGPT or ask Copilot to help you build out a model for integrating and deploying these environments, the one thing that you're going to find is that the system will often give you a single file that does everything. And that may not be the way that you want to actually structure your code. It might actually become even very limiting, especially if some of the infrastructure is static infrastructure. Hey, I need to set up a DNS name service. Well, I'm likely going to do that once and then create multiple services underneath that DNS name service, which means I really want that code, the DNS configuration and deployment code, to be static, to effectively be something that is done as a separate, almost a separate module, even in my Terraform. Currently, ChatGPT doesn't really have enough visibility in systems architecture to be able to say, oh, well, you're going to want to break your environment up into multiple different things. Now, I'll admit, I did not ever ask ChatGPT to say, hey, how would you structure a Terraform environment that was going to be providing a platform and integrating into that? So there is still some work. Actually, I'm guessing if I asked that question, it would probably come back with an interesting answer and say, well, this is how you might go about doing that. That's one of the interesting benefits of this tool, is that it will give you some kind of answer, even if that answer is really generic and really not exactly the core focus of what we're trying to accomplish. But again, we have to sort of think outside the box in terms of the questions that we're answering and how those answers are going to impact our ability to leverage this code, not just as an example, but as a core part of our platform and our platform development and delivery. So the core architecture work still has to happen. And it might be that ChatGPT can help you accelerate that process. But in the greater scheme of things, you're still going to have to focus back in on understanding the actual language, understanding the architecture and strategy for doing things like Git enhanced delivery of infrastructure so that you can actually keep track of separate projects, separate resources, centralized resources that you might need to look up. So how do you look up those resources that you have created? How are you tagging things appropriately, et cetera? All of that still comes into play. It's actually, I guess if you think about it, when you go and you ask the system to write you a piece of code, often it gives you a function that just does explicitly what you asked for. But when you think about that in terms of something that you can manage and deploy into production, where's the logging integration? Where is the error recovery strategy and mapping for that particular code? There are all these other things that you need to have in the back of your mind, or maybe feed into your prompt. Again, these are not the way that we normally think about this. But if you really want the soup to nuts solution, you have to think about how you're going to ask that soup to nuts question against the platform and against the environment. So I think the real key here is, the takeaways I would say are, don't shy away from ChatGPT. It is a tool. let's make the best use of it that we can, and let's figure out how to actually morph it into something that really helps us. Realize that how you ask the question is going to impact the kind of answer that you get. Realize that often it will even hint at the other things that you need to consider. Well, don't forget to consider those things. Don't forget to consider, what does security mean in terms of input management. Just about every quick start in the world says, hey, start out here and don't forget to drop your token into your code here, and don't forget to drop the secret into your code there. Well, make sure that when you ask for code from ChatGPT, that you also say the secrets are managed externally, and here's how you can go and look up that secret, so that I can actually incorporate that in, and ChatGPT or whatever Copilot learning model you're using can actually incorporate that into your code base. Don't forget that we have to think about the actual automation and deployment, the automation being sort of key to making these things cloud services. Let's not forget that even though ChatGPT can help us accelerate the understanding of how these services work and how they interact, that we can also learn from them exactly how we need to understand the bigger scheme of the system, right? How do we actually need to maybe ask for, what is the general architecture that I should be considering in terms of deploying infrastructure as code using Terraform against multiple clouds? How do I differentiate the different clouds? How do I differentiate the services, the core resource services that we're all going to share versus the individual application delivery services? And how can I break that apart and make that scalable? How can I handle this in terms of Git automation, and what are the testing processes I should do? We can ask all of these questions, and some of the answers will be sensible. Some of them may just not make valid sense relative to our environment, but that's where we as humans still come in. We are still there as the final discriminator between what we ask and what we get. Just like any other computer entity, any entity really, garbage in equals garbage out, right? If you ask somebody, even somebody who's very knowledgeable in an environment, for something that is a ridiculous request, they may try to generate an answer for you because they're trying to answer the question that you have posed, but that doesn't mean that the question was right. And the AI really can't currently differentiate a good question from a bad question. It just does its best to answer it within its own sort of mindset and its own sort of predisposed ideas and its moderated engine as well. So there's often a moderation component to all of these services. But I do think that we need to forge ahead and look at how platforms can be accelerated and extended in terms of usability, in terms of functionality, in terms of supporting all of the services and features that folks are looking for. I don't think that the AI is going to take our platform jobs away from us, but certainly we should be looking at how it can help make those jobs faster, more efficient, more cost effective for our businesses. Because if we can actually reduce the cost of infrastructure because we're automating more of it, we're making it more efficient to automate, we're discovering errors in our automation processes that would potentially generate massive bills for us. These are all things that are pretty fantastic. And I do think that that this is a tool that we should be considering, especially as we think about, how does our infrastructure platform change, or does it change if we're starting to accelerate the delivery of these resources with the large language model chat-based interaction and or code management-based interaction. Look, this has been Robert Starmer bringing you another episode of Cumulus on Cloud. Our co-host Lou will be back next time. At least we hope he will be. And we're going to be continuing on this topic, basically this idea of platform and how platform works. If this is interesting to you, please don't forget to subscribe. If you liked it, we love to hear about that. Give us a star, a thumbs up, whatever the particular platform lets you do, so that we know that you're interested in this. In most cases, there is a feedback form. There's the ability to converse. We'd love to chat with you. If you have a question or if you hear something, go ahead and drop a comment. Probably the YouTube channel is the one that we're going to be most able to have a conversation on. But if nothing else, there's a contact form in cumul.us, and we can certainly chat with you there as well. Regardless, if there's something we can do to help, we'd love to know about it. If there's something that we can talk about that you'd be interested in, we'd love to hear about that too. And we hope that you have a great week. Talk to you soon.